Everyone who has ever worked a night shift knows there is a version of a building that only exists after midnight, when the people are gone and the hallways stop pretending to be busy, and the machines are the only ones still awake with you, humming along like they are keeping some kind of watch. I always thought that feeling was harmless, just the quiet playing tricks on a tired mind, and for almost 2 years working graveyard shift at St. Vincent's, that is exactly what I believed it was. I was 26 years old, working as a night nurse in the old wing of the hospital, the part of the building they never bothered to fully renovate because it was mostly used for record storage and overflow equipment by then, and my job between 2 and 4 in the morning was simple: walk the halls, check on the handful of patients still down there recovering, and log anything unusual in the system before the day shift came in. I liked the quiet of it, honestly, the long, empty corridors and the low buzz of the fluorescent lights, and I got used to the sound the old elevator made when it groaned its way between floors, a low, tired, mechanical sound, one I could recognize with my eyes closed by the end of my first year. There was a rhythm to those nights that I came to depend on, almost without noticing: the vending machine humming in the break room, the squeak of my shoes on the waxed tile, the particular quiet of the old wing after the last visitor had gone home and the last chart had been updated for the evening. Nothing about those 2 years felt strange to me, not the routine, not the building, not the sub-basement where the paper charts were kept in long metal cabinets that smelled like dust and old ink, and something faintly like the inside of a church basement, because after enough nights down there, strange starts to feel like normal, and normal is the thing you stop questioning. It started with something so small I almost didn't write it down, which was a box of gauze and saline that went missing from the supply closet near the old wing, the kind of thing that happens sometimes because supplies get moved around or miscounted or borrowed by a shift that forgot to log it, so I just noted it in the inventory log and moved on with my night. But then it happened again the following week, a second box, and then a third the week after that. Small things, easy to explain away individually, but strange in the way they kept repeating on the same rough schedule. And then it wasn't just supplies anymore, it was a patient chart, one of the paper ones we still kept for the long-term overflow patients in that wing. And when I pulled it to check on a medication update, I noticed the handwriting on the most recent entry didn't match anyone on our current staff roster, not the shape of the letters, not the way the numbers were formed, and the login code stamped next to it belonged to an employee ID that our system said had been inactive for 6 years. I remember standing there under the buzzing light with that chart in my hands, feeling the kind of confusion that hasn't turned into fear yet, just a small itch at the back of my mind telling me that something didn't add up, and I told myself there had to be a simple explanation, maybe a clerical error, maybe an old account that never got properly closed out, maybe a temp worker using someone else's old credentials because the system hadn't caught up with a new hire yet. I read back through the entry twice, then a third time, looking for anything that would make it make sense, a typo, a misfiled page, anything ordinary, and each time I came up with nothing that actually explained it, just more questions layered on top of the first one. That was the normal part of my life at St. Vincent's, the part where I still believed every strange thing had a boring explanation waiting behind it, and I want you to hold on to that feeling for a second, because it's the same feeling most of us walk around with every single day, the quiet assumption that the systems around us are solid, that badge access and login credentials and locked doors mean exactly what they're supposed to mean. I brought the chart discrepancy to my supervisor the next night, mostly just to cover myself in case anyone asked about it later, and she frowned at it for a moment before telling me she'd flag it for the records department, and I remember feeling almost relieved, like I'd handed the strange little puzzle off to someone else's desk, and that should have been the end of it. Except 2 nights after that, I was doing my usual walk past the service elevator at the end of the old wing, the one that technically wasn't supposed to be used after hours except for equipment transport, and I noticed the floor indicator light land on a number that didn't exist on the building directory posted right next to it. I stood there for a long moment just staring at that little lit-up number because the directory listed the ground floor, the basement, and the sub-basement where the records were kept. 3 floors, clearly labeled, nothing unusual about any of them, but the number glowing above the elevator doors sat between the basement and the sub-basement, a floor that had no name and no listing anywhere in the building's paperwork, not on the directory, not on the fire escape map bolted to the wall a few feet away, not anywhere. My first instinct was that the the button panel was just malfunctioning, an old elevator in an old wing, doing what old elevators do, flickering, glitching, showing a number that meant nothing at all. And I almost convinced myself of that, right up until the doors opened directly in front of me, unprompted, with no one having called it. And for just a second before they slid shut again, I caught the edge of a long, dim corridor that looked nothing like the clean tile of the sub-basement I knew, more like a maintenance level that had been sealed off and forgotten a long time ago, lit only by a single bulb somewhere far down the hall, swinging just slightly, like something or someone had brushed past it moments before. I didn't go in, and I want to be honest that the reason I didn't go in wasn't bravery. It was the plain animal instinct that tells you a space is wrong before your mind can even explain why, some old, buried part of the brain that still knows how to recognize danger even when everything around you looks calm. So instead I went straight to security and reported what I'd seen, trying to keep my voice steady while I described a floor that, according to every piece of paperwork in that building, simply did not exist. And that's when the what moment really landed for me, because when the security guard pulled up the building's access logs for that elevator, scrolling back through weeks and then months of entries, he found repeated late-night trips to that same unlisted floor, going back further than either of us expected, all of them swiped in using the same inactive employee badge number that had shown up on the chart I'd found earlier. Someone still had a working badge from an employee who was supposed to have left the hospital years ago, and that someone had been quietly moving through our building at night the entire time I had been working there, close enough, on more than one of those nights, to have passed me in a hallway without me ever knowing it. Once maintenance and hospital security finally got clearance to access that sealed level, working with a locksmith who had to force one of the doors because the lock had rusted shut years earlier, they found what amounted to a small, makeshift living space built out of a decommissioned storage room, blankets folded neatly in one corner, canned food stacked along a shelf, a battery lantern sitting on an overturned crate that served as a table, along with a stack of supply boxes that matched, item for item, what had gone missing from our closets over the past several months. It turned out the man living there had been let go from a maintenance position at St. Vincent's almost 7 years earlier, quietly and without much fuss, the kind of departure that gets buried in paperwork and forgotten by everyone except the person it actually happened to, and somewhere along the way, whether by oversight or by design, he had never returned his badge. Over the years, he had slowly built a hidden routine of slipping back into the one place that still felt like it belonged to him, moving through service corridors most staff never even noticed, and eventually editing patient charts in small, strange, almost tender little ways, adding a note here, correcting a detail there, just to feel like he still had a hand in the work, a purpose the hospital had taken from him without ever really explaining why, at least not in a way that had ever felt real to him. They found him a few nights later, sitting quietly in that unlisted room like he'd been waiting to be found the whole time, and he came out without a fight, saying almost nothing except that he just wanted to keep helping people, the only way he still knew how, in the only building that had ever felt like it needed him. I finished out my shift that night the same way I always did, walking the halls, checking on patients, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights, filling out the same reports I'd filled out 100 times before. Except now, every time that old elevator groaned its way past the basement floor, I found myself watching the number light up above the door a half-second longer than I used to, waiting, without meaning to see if it would stop somewhere it shouldn't, because I had learned, in a way I never wanted to learn it, that the version of a building you think you know at 2 in the morning is only ever the version it lets you see. The phone at the front desk rang at 3 in the morning, and when I picked it up, housekeeping's overnight supervisor was on the other end, actually whispering, telling me that room 214 had a Do Not Disturb sign on the door again, for the 4th night in a row, on a reservation that our system said had checked out 19 days earlier. I remember looking down at my screen, at the little green checkmark next to that room number that meant vacant and ready, and then back up at the phone in my hand, feeling that particular kind of confusion that starts small and then spreads slowly through your whole body, because two things that were both supposed to be true could not both be true at the same time. I should back up, because none of this makes sense without a little bit of the ordinary first. I was 24, working the overnight desk at a mid-range extended stay hotel off the highway, the kind of place that gets a mix of long-term contractors, families between houses, and the occasional exhausted traveler who just needs 4 walls and a bed for one night. My shift ran from 11 at night until 7 in the morning, and most of it was quiet, check-ins for late flights, the occasional noise complaint, restocking the little coffee station in the lobby, filling out the overnight audit before the day manager came in. I liked the graveyard hours because the lobby got still in a way that felt almost peaceful, just the hum of the ice machine down the hall and the soft blue glow of the parking lot lights coming through the front windows, and I'd gotten comfortable enough in that stillness that I stopped really thinking about who was actually behind each of those closed doors upstairs. Room 214 first came up on my radar about 3 weeks before that phone call, when a guest named Daniel Ferris checked in for what was supposed to be a 5-night corporate stay, paid for with a company card, standard as anything, the kind of booking I processed a dozen times a week without a second thought. His stay ended, according to the system, on schedule, checkout processed, room marked vacant, and I moved on to the next thing on my list, the way you do when nothing about a transaction gives you any reason to look twice. But then housekeeping started reporting something strange, night after night, saying that room 214 still had a do not disturb sign hanging on the handle, and when they knocked anyway just to check, because policy required a welfare check after a certain number of ignored days, no one ever answered, but the room clearly had someone in it, a suitcase by the bed, a phone charger plugged into the wall, the bathroom counter cluttered with someone's toiletries. The first time I actually looked into it myself, I pulled up the reservation system and found that room 214 had in fact been rebooked, this time under a name I didn't recognize, a man named David Farrell, checking in for what looked like a fresh 5-night corporate stay, paid for with a company card belonging to the exact same business account as the first booking. I sat there for a moment just looking at the two names side by side on my screen, Daniel Ferris and David Farrell, so close in shape and sound that I could easily see how a tired clerk, glancing quickly at an ID, might not catch the difference, and I felt that same slow, spreading confusion again, the sense of two things that were supposed to be separate turning out to be uncomfortably similar. For a while, I told myself there was a boring explanation waiting behind it, same as anyone would. Maybe it was a corporate rotation, different employees from the same company cycling through the same room while working a nearby job site. That kind of thing happens sometimes with construction crews and traveling technicians, and the front desk wasn't really in the business of interrogating guests over paperwork that technically checked out. I even mentioned it to my manager during a shift handoff, just in passing, and she shrugged and said as long as the card kept clearing, it wasn't really our problem to solve, and for a couple of weeks, that answer was good enough for me, the same way it's usually good enough for all of us to let a small, strange thing go unexamined, because examining it means admitting something might actually be wrong. Then came the phone call at 3 in the morning, the one where housekeeping told me the do not disturb sign was still up, the 4th night in a row on a room that, according to the system I was staring at, had no active guest in it at all. I pulled the reservation history again while she was still on the line, and this time I saw it clearly, laid out in a neat little column of names, Daniel Ferris, David Farrell, and now a third booking, checked in 2 days earlier under the name Dean Ferris, same corporate card, same 5-night stay, same room, every single time. 3 names, close enough to trip past a distracted eye at check-in, all funneling back into that one room upstairs like the booking system itself was trying to hide a single, continuous stay behind a rotating door of almost identical strangers. I told housekeeping to hold off going in alone, and I called my manager, who didn't answer, so I did the only thing that felt right at 3 in the morning, with a room full of question marks 2 floors above me. I called hotel security, and then, once he got a look at the reservation history over my shoulder, we called the police together, because something about 3 near-identical names circling the same room for 19 straight days had stopped feeling like an accounting error, and started feeling like something being deliberately hidden. While we waited for someone to arrive, I kept glancing at the little dot on our floor plan screen that represented room 214, lit up the same pale color as every other occupied room on the map, giving no indication at all of how long, or how strangely, that light had actually been burning. When the officers finally knocked on that door with a hotel master key in hand, no one answered, same as every welfare check before it, so they used the key, and the room, according to what I was told afterward by hotel security, looked lived in a way that didn't match anyone's short business trip. Clothes hung neatly in the closet, a small stack of paperback books on the nightstand, a cheap desk fan running in the corner, humming quietly against the silence, but the room itself was empty. No guest, no Daniel Ferris, no David Farrell, no Dean Ferris, just their things, arranged the way a person arranges things when they actually plan on staying somewhere for a long time, not the way anyone packs for a 5-night corporate trip. It took hotel security almost 2 full days of digging back through camera footage and card transaction records to piece together what had actually been happening, and what they found was that the corporate card funding all 3 of those bookings had been reported stolen by its real company almost a month earlier, flagged, canceled, and yet somehow still clearing charges through our system because of a processing delay between the card network and our front desk software, a gap that someone had clearly noticed and clearly understood how to exploit. The person actually staying in that room, based on grainy footage of someone slipping in and out through the side stairwell at odd hours, always in a baseball cap, always angling his face away from the lobby cameras, had simply been rebooking his own room under slightly altered names every few days, using a card that shouldn't have worked at all, keeping himself technically checked in without ever once having to walk past the front desk and risk a real conversation with someone like me. They never actually caught him in the room itself, because by the time security connected all 3 names to the same stolen card and called the police back in, he had already cleared out sometime in the early morning hours, taking the paperback books, the desk fan, all of it, and leaving room 214 exactly as vacant as our system had insisted it was for 19 straight days. What stayed with me longer than almost anything else from that stretch of the job wasn't fear exactly, it was the plain, quiet fact that a man had been living 2 floors above the front desk for nearly 3 weeks, walking past guests in the stairwell, hearing the same ice machine hum I heard every night, close enough that I probably passed him near the vending machines at least once without either of us saying a word, and the only reason anyone ever noticed was a stubborn little sign hanging crooked on a door handle, refusing, night after night, to let anyone come in. I still work the overnight desk now, a different hotel, a different city, and most nights are exactly as quiet and ordinary as they always were. But every time I glance up at that little floor plan screen, at all those small, evenly lit dots representing rooms full of people I will never actually see, I find myself wondering, just for a second, how many of those lights are telling me the truth, and how many of them are simply the last thing a system was told to believe. The monitor for camera 6 glitched at 2:47 a.m., the exact same time it had glitched the night before, and the night before that, a quick stutter of gray static, lasting maybe 2 full seconds before the image snapped back to normal, showing the same empty stretch of hallway on the 3rd floor that it always showed, and I remember sitting up straighter in my chair that 3rd night, because 3 nights of the exact same glitch at the exact same minute on the exact same camera had stopped feeling like a coincidence and started feeling like a pattern I didn't understand yet. I need to explain the job a little, because none of this makes sense without it. I was 31, working overnight security at a mid-sized office building downtown, 7 floors of insurance companies and a marketing firm, and 1 dentist's office on the ground level, and my job between 11 at night and 7 in the morning was split between 2 things: sitting at the security desk in the lobby, watching a wall of camera feeds, and walking a physical patrol route through the building roughly once an hour, checking locked doors, testing stairwell exits, making sure nothing looked out of place. I'd been doing that job for almost a year by the time camera 6 started acting up, and in that year I had learned the particular rhythm of an empty office building at night, the way the HVAC system clicked on and off on its own schedule, the way certain fluorescent lights buzzed just slightly louder than others, the long, hollow quiet of a building built for hundreds of people currently holding exactly 1. The 3rd floor hallway that camera 6 rugs covered wasn't anything special, just a straight stretch of gray carpet running between 2 rows of glass-walled offices, leading down to a set of restrooms and a supply closet at the far end, the kind of hallway you'd walk past 100 times without ever really looking at it twice. But once I noticed that glitch repeating on schedule, I started watching that camera more closely than any of the other 11 feeds on my wall, and I noticed something else, something small enough that I almost dismissed it, which was that every single night, a few minutes before the static hit, the supply closet door at the far end of that hallway appeared to be closed, and every night, a few minutes after the static cleared, it was open, just slightly, just a few inches, every single time. I told myself, the way you do, that it was probably just a loose latch, an old door in an old building that didn't sit quite right in its frame, maybe a draft from the HVAC system nudging it open on its own schedule the same way it clicked on and off. I actually walked up there myself on my next patrol, checked the latch, checked the hinges, even swung the door open and shut a dozen times testing the mechanism, and everything about it seemed completely fine, tight, sturdy, nothing that should have been swinging open on its own in the middle of the night. That was the first moment the itch in the back of my mind stopped feeling like idle curiosity and started feeling like something closer to a warning. The next night, I decided to actually watch that hallway live during the glitch window instead of reviewing it after the fact, sitting forward in my chair with my eyes locked on camera 6 starting around 2:40, watching that empty gray hallway sit there doing nothing at all, exactly the way it was supposed to. At 2:47, right on schedule, the static hit, 2 full seconds of gray nothing, and when the picture snapped back, the supply closet door was already open, wider than the few inches I'd seen before, open enough that a person could easily have slipped through it. My hands actually went cold, sitting there in that quiet lobby, because I had been watching that screen the entire time, and there had been no one in that hallway before the static, and yet somehow, the second the picture came back, something had changed. I grabbed my radio and walked the stairwell up to the 3rd floor myself, moving faster than I usually did on a routine check, and by the time I reached that hallway, the closet door was standing open just like the monitor had shown, but the closet itself, when I shined my flashlight inside, was completely empty, shelves of paper and cleaning supplies, nothing else, no sign that anyone had been there at all. I stood in that hallway for a long moment afterward, flashlight still raised, listening to nothing but my own breathing and the distant hum of the building's ventilation system, and it was in that silence that I first noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before, a very faint smell hanging in the air near the closet, something like cologne, cheap and slightly sweet, the kind of smell that lingers in a small space for a while after someone has actually stood in it. I went back to the security desk and pulled the recorded footage from that exact glitch window, slowing it down frame by frame instead of watching it in real time, and that's when I found the detail that actually stopped my breathing for a second, because in the very last clean frame before the static hit, right at the edge of the frame, barely inside the camera's view, there was the faint outline of a shoulder and part of an arm pressed flat against the wall just outside the hallway, as if someone had been standing there the entire time, waiting for the exact right second to step forward, the exact second the camera consistently, reliably, impossibly glitched. I brought that footage to my supervisor the next morning, and together we pulled the building's key fob access logs going back several weeks, and what we found lined up with a precision that made my stomach turn, because every single instance of that 2:47 a.m. glitch corresponded exactly with a fob entry through the 3rd floor stairwell door, logged under the credentials of a guard named Marcus Whitlow, an employee who, according to HR, had been fired from the security company almost 5 months earlier following a dispute over missed shifts. His fob access should have been deactivated the same day his employment ended, a standard procedure, one that apparently, somewhere in the handoff between HR and the building's security software, had simply never been completed. Once we understood what we were actually looking at, my supervisor pulled the full history, and it turned out Marcus hadn't just been slipping in occasionally. He had been entering that building almost every single night for months, always timing his entry to land during the brief camera malfunction he had apparently discovered and learned to exploit early on, a known glitch in that particular model of camera that could be manually triggered with a specific handheld signal jammer, cheap, easy to buy, easy to hide in a coat pocket. He had been using that 2 2-second window to slip into the supply closet, where we eventually discovered he had been quietly storing a small bag of personal items, and from there, moving through the building at will during the rest of my patrol, always staying one hallway ahead of wherever I happened to be walking, using a former employee's intimate knowledge of the patrol schedule to stay perfectly, deliberately invisible. The night we finally caught him, security brought in an extra guard to walk 2 overlapping patrol routes instead of 1, closing the gap in the pattern he had spent months learning to exploit, and at 2:47 a.m., right on schedule, the jamming signal hit camera 6. The static rolled across the screen exactly like it always did, and this time, when the picture cleared, the second guard was already standing in that hallway, flashlight raised, close enough to hear the supply closet door creak open from the other side. Marcus didn't run, and he didn't fight. He just stood there in the closet doorway for a long moment, looking almost relieved, saying quietly that he didn't have anywhere else that still felt like it made sense to go at night, that the building was the only place where he still knew exactly where everything was supposed to be. I still work that same building now, and the supply closet has a new lock on it, and camera 6 has been replaced with a newer model that doesn't glitch the same way the old one did. But some nights, walking that 3rd floor hallway on my rounds, I catch myself pausing outside that closet door anyway, listening for a moment longer than I need to, because I learned something on that job I never expected to learn, which is that a building can feel completely empty and be entirely wrong about it for months at a time, and the only proof you ever get is a flicker of static that lasts exactly 2 seconds too long. The $20 bill came across the counter already folded the wrong way, soft at the edges like it had been handled too many times, and it wasn't until I smoothed it out to feed it into the register that I saw the handwriting pressed faintly into the corner, small, careful block letters spelling out a street name and a house number, and I remember the exact second my stomach dropped, because I recognized that street name, because it was mine. I need to back up just far enough to explain how I got to that counter in the first place. I was 22, working the overnight shift alone at a gas station convenience store off a 2-lane county highway, 11 at night until 6 in the morning, 4 nights a week, ringing up gas and cigarettes and energy drinks for truckers and shift workers and the occasional lost tourist who'd taken a wrong turn off the interstate. I'd worked there almost a year by that point, long enough to know most of the regulars by name, long enough to feel safe behind that counter even alone in the middle of the night, because nothing in that year had ever given me a real reason to feel otherwise. One of those regulars was a man who came in maybe twice a week, always somewhere between 1 and 3 in the morning, always buying the same thing, a pack of cigarettes and a bottle of orange juice, always paying in cash, always polite in a quiet, careful sort of way that I never thought twice about. I didn't know his name, I just knew his order, the way you learn dozens of small routines working a job like that, and if you had asked me a month before that folded 20 landed on my counter, I would have told you he was one of the easiest customers I had. Looking down at my own street written in his handwriting, I felt my whole body go cold and hyper-aware at the same time, and I tried to keep my face neutral while I finished the transaction, sliding his change across the counter like nothing was wrong, watching him take it, nod once, and walk back out to his truck exactly the way he always did. The second the door chime stopped ringing behind him, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and pulled up my own address just to be sure I hadn't imagined it, and I hadn't. The numbers matched exactly, right down to the apartment letter at the end. I called my manager immediately, but it went straight to voicemail, so I called the non-emergency police line instead, trying to explain in a voice that kept climbing higher than I wanted it to, that a customer had just handed me cash with my home address written on it, and the dispatcher told me an officer would swing by when one was available, which in that county at that hour could mean anywhere from 10 minutes to over an hour. I stood behind that counter after hanging up, staring at the parking lot through the front windows, watching his truck's taillights disappear down the highway, and it was only then, replaying the last few weeks in my head, that a second, worse realization hit me. Every single one of his visits, every single time over the past several weeks, had landed either right at store opening when I was the only one there setting up, or in the final hour before close when my coworker had already left for the night and I was locking up alone, and I had never once noticed the pattern because I hadn't been looking for one, because nothing about a quiet, regular buying cigarettes and orange juice had ever seemed worth tracking. He hadn't just been coming in at random hours that happened to be quiet, he had been timing every single visit specifically around the moments I would be by myself. I didn't wait for the officer to arrive to make my next move. I locked the front doors from the inside despite it not being closing time, flipped the sign, and called my manager again, this time not stopping until she finally picked up on the fourth try, her voice thick with sleep as I told her everything as fast as I could get the words out. She told me to stay locked inside no matter what, that she was calling the district manager and getting someone out there immediately, and I remember standing in the middle of that empty store, surrounded by shelves of chips and motor oil, listening for the sound of an engine returning to the parking lot, my heart slamming hard enough that I could feel it in my ears. Mainbrende tumulos elniembral nund, hidazerdores penanambio. Sitting in the driver's seat for a long moment, just looking at the store before getting out and walking up to the locked front doors, testing the handle once, twice, then knocking, calling out in that same quiet, careful voice I'd heard 100 times before, asking if everything was okay, asking why the doors were locked early. I didn't answer. I just stood frozen behind the counter, watching him through the glass, watching him wait there a beat too long, longer than a confused customer waits, before finally turning and walking back toward his truck, not toward the highway, but slowly, deliberately, around the side of the building, toward the employee entrance in the back. That was the moment every ounce of doubt left my body, because a confused customer doesn't go looking for the back door, and I grabbed the phone and called dispatch again, my voice cracking as I told them he was circling the building right now, and this time, maybe because of the added urgency, maybe because an officer happened to already be close, I heard sirens within what felt like minutes, red and blue lights sweeping across the front windows, just as I heard the back door handle rattle hard against its lock. By the time the officer reached the back of the building, flashlight raised, the man was standing there quietly, hands empty at his sides, and when asked what he was doing, he said only that he'd been worried about me, that he just wanted to make sure I was safe closing up alone. It came out over the following days, through the police investigation and a restraining order I filed shortly after, that he had written down my address weeks earlier after apparently following my car home one night after a closing shift, and had been carrying that folded 20 around ever since, waiting, according to what he later told an officer, for what he called the right moment to give it back to me himself. He was arrested on a stalking charge that night, and the store changed its overnight policy within the week, no more solo closes, a second employee scheduled every single night no matter what it cost them in payroll. I still work nights, a different store now, a safer one, always with someone else on shift beside me. But I still check every single bill that crosses my counter before I feed it into the register, running my thumb along every corner and every fold, because I learned in the space of one ordinary transaction that the most dangerous thing a stranger can hand you sometimes looks exactly like $20 and sounds exactly like "please, keep the change."